emotional richness to my experience and to my contact with others and the world. I want to be able to help myself to certain sorts of lists or certain ways of thinking or certain vocabularies. Because although that looks innocuous, somebody might say, I'm sort of functionally religious because I like the hymns and I like the church services and the fellowship with other people. But one has to ask them to be reflective about that because of what it can lead to. And because of the fact that so many people take literally what their bishops and theologians don't take literally. In other words, it's admitting a way of thinking and talking about things that very naturally leads down a short degree slope to all sorts of undesirable things.
There's an enormous disconnect, isn't there, between what so-called sophisticated theologians talk about themselves and what they talk about when they get up in the pulpit and mislead their flocks into believing.
Exactly right. It's representative of two different mindsets. The mindset that wants a narrative, wants a story, a beginning, a middle, and an end, an explanation for everything, and a set of instructions, a recipe about how to get through the story successfully. And that story, people will say to you, but it also contains plenty of mystery and plenty of depth and profundity. Of course, what they mean is that all the bits of the story that don't make real sense, we can just refer to as mysteries. And the alternative mindset is one which says, there's a vast amount that we don't know, but it's great fun finding out, investigating it, and we do it in our most disciplined, most careful, public, repeatable, testable way, where we're under the scrutiny of other careful inquirers whenever we hypothesize something or put it into theory. Now that mindset, which is much more open textured, and which involves accepting ignorance and accepting that there's a great deal of work to do, is very different from the type of mindset which in fact has its beginning, middle, and end is a kind of closed mindset. And these people come to those people, closed narrative, come to the open-minded, inquiry people, and say to them, how can you disprove our story? You can't disprove it. Or what would count for you as proof that our story is right? And there is such an incommensurability and such a big bridge that has to be crossed, and that was my point earlier about the amount of legwork that you have to do before you can give their question credibility.
It is extraordinary how our scientists are sometimes accused of overconfidence and arrogance when we're the ones who are actually trying to find out, rather than laying down this is the way it was because it says so in the Holy Book, or worse, it says so by revelation.
Yeah,
absolute confidence with no basis whatever.
You see that Richard and I sing from the same hymn sheet. Shall we perhaps get some comments or questions?
There's a system of microphones somewhere, isn't there?
Yes. Hello. I'd just like to tell you a story that happened from my family. My father was coming home from he was a very practical, down-to-earth man. And he came home from doing a bit of work for a family friend. And he came to a T-junction. And he saw, he said afterwards, a face. And he said, no, it can't be. And he heard this deep, booming voice saying, yes, it is. And he had to pull over, and he was absolutely shattered. Now, he had no religious interest, my father. And, of course, he was actually, I got the impression afterwards, he didn't want to talk about it. He didn't join any religion. He didn't take it any further forward, as far as I know. But, of course, my mother and I were more interested in it than he was. But it's something that, of course, has deeply puzzled me and has made me think a lot since then. And I just wanted to share that because it was something that came like a bolt from the blue to somebody who least expected it to happen. And so, I have no explanation for it. but it's something that seemed to be important.
Who was the face? Was it Colonel Gaddafi?
No, it wasn't. Apparently, so he interpreted it, Jesus.
Jesus. Who was this?
This was my father.
No, but who did he see?
You saw Jesus.
That's what he said. That's what he thought he saw.
Like seeing it in a pizza or something?
No, seeing it in the sky. And hearing the voice.
Well, thank you for the story.
I'd like to tell you a story in return, which is that a couple of years ago, I was on a walking holiday in Somerset, and I booked myself into a little inn called the Castle of Comfort. It's still there, you can go and visit it. A tiny little 15th century preaching inn. And when I got there, there seemed nobody around, and I knocked on the door, and the door opened with a creak under the impulse of my knuckles. And I went in, and there was a sign on the wall saying, guests must phone the landlord who lives some 15 minutes away, and he'll come up and book you and give you your key. So I phoned him, and while I was waiting for him, I wandered around, and there was a book on the bar which said, report to the findings of the British Psychical Society on the hauntings in the Castle of Comfort. So I read it, and every room had its ghosts. In fact, several of them. And when the landlord got there and I booked in, I said to him, anybody else staying here tonight? And he said, no, you've got the place to yourself, apart from the ghost things. So that night, when I went to bed, I thought to myself, if anything happens or any ghosts appear, it can be extremely annoying, because it means a complete revision of my metaphysics. And I think making the mistake of thinking that if I had seen a ghost, I would immediately have assumed that this was evidence of the supernatural. Do you know what? I didn't get to make this sleep all night. This house creaked and groaned because it kept shrinking and expanding and maybe the wood was very old. But much more to the point, the A something or other was right outside the front door and the lorries went up and down all night. And that was about as ghostly as it got.
Who's got the microphone now?
A better system is to queue up.
Sorry, I think we're going to take one from the other room now.
Oh, okay.
Hello.
The ghostly voice.
So you started with a very interesting question now, which I thought was fascinating. I just wanted to propose a potential story to you that might convince you of hypothetical. Suppose we were to live on this planet for thousands or tens of thousands of years and explore the galaxy, meet other alien civilizations, and come to an understanding of fundamental physics that we believed was absolutely fundamental and was completely supported by all experiments that we ever performed. And in fact, all of these other alien civilizations that we had were also bound by the same theory of physics that we had and was very well supported. And then we met a being who purported to be a god, and we found that he was able to change matter at will, bring energy into the universe, defy any of the laws of physics, rearrange the universe at his will. Would that convince you of the existence of God?
Not quite sure why we need all the preamble to that. You simply need to postulate a being who can do absolutely anything. I actually worry about conjurers, people like Darren Brown and Penn and Teller, because they seem to be able to do absolutely inexplicable things. And if one didn't go better, one would say this has got to be supernatural. I think once again, I mean, you simply added, one more step to the hypothetical things we were talking about earlier. Why would it convince you any more than that you were hallucinating or that this was such an advanced civilization that they had a new kind of physics that we didn't understand about, or something else, or indeed a country?
There's a problem about examples of this kind, because when one thinks or tries to think of the kind of case which would be persuasive as to the possibility of something non-natural or supernatural, or which suspends natural law, one comes up with examples which are designed to do that job. Richard and I were looking at something down there at St. Richard, which was an example that if you dug below whatever desert it was in the Nevada desert, and found a whole lot of gold-plated Fords underground.
Model T4.
Model T4. Wouldn't you think that this was rather odd? Of course, America's full of great respect to American citizens here, old people who might very well do that kind of thing, so they wouldn't necessarily be supernatural, might just come naturally. But if it were done in such a way that we couldn't explain by any other means, then Dr. Dodge. Now, Dr. Dodge is meant to be an invitation to think, well, wouldn't this be a possible indication of something supernatural? And my response to it is to say that if you work very hard and design examples which in themselves are not very plausible, not very sustainable, don't really themselves make any kind of sense, in order to offer something which would be a possible indication that there might be something else, something in addition to the natural world that we should take into account, then how much work has that actually done? That's the question one has to ask oneself. Somehow or other, the suggestion that would really test our intuitions on this matter or stretch our concepts on this matter has to be something which in itself has a certain sort of plausibility, a certain kind of intelligibility, really to constitute something that could be a possible test of our thought.
Yeah.
This lady here is one.
Ask you, I've got a feeling that sort of people's personalities are very much, well, obviously linked with what they're feeling, but I'm curious to know whether there's any evidence that people who are believers have a certain personality type, and people who are not in that group have a different personality thing. I mean, just generally. I mean, I don't think anyone's done any study of it, but I wonder if there is a link between personality and whether you are a believer or
Well, I would bet my boots the answer is yes. No doubt there are psychologists here who could answer
But
that.
I mean, for example, I wonder if there are certain types of people who have a need, for example, to belong to a group where, if you like, they're given rules and regulations because they're need people in that way, for example. Maybe other people who are more able to think by themselves.
Yes, and if you think about it, it would be extremely odd if you divided people up into the extremely religious and the extremely unreligious, and then did psychological tests on them. I mean, there's obviously got to be differences. There's probably lots and lots of differences between them, and I'm sure it's been done. There are genetic differences too, because it's been twin studies show.
I mean, there is an interesting point, which is that for the vast majority of people who have a religious commitment of one kind or another, the reason for having that commitment is a non-rational one. That's to say, it's not the result of an adult, mature thought process they've gone through and then they've chosen. They've said, right, the facts, the evidence, everything convinced me finally to be a Hindu. That tends to happen in very, very rare cases. The vast majority of people have the religious commitment they do because their parents had it, because they come from that community, or because their emotional needs or things that happen in their life, grief or failure or something, has predisposed them to desire to be with a group of people. It's the religion rather than what the religion thinks it believes, which is important in that kind of case. Now, to say that something is non-rational is not just to dismiss it as irrational. Irrationality is going out in the rain without an umbrella thinking you will get wet. Non-rational reasons are traditional, historical reasons, emotional reasons, other sorts of needs that we as complex creatures like man have. And that point, the point that the vast majority of people of faith have their faith for non-rational reasons, is an important one, because it shows that the discussion we've been having about proof, about evidence, about how we would change our minds and so on, is actually marginal to this whole debate about people having a faith or not. People who have ceased to have a faith, people who've given up a religious commitment, and this happens with, unless we're Chinese or something. The Chinese are very superstitious people, but not religious people. That's a quite different thing. But people in, say, Muslim countries or Christian countries who've been brought up in the usual traditional way and who've given up their faith, they've usually done so for rational reasons. And there is therefore an asymmetry between people, the bulk of people